A major rescue operation is continuing tonight on remote Christmas Island, where at least 27 asylum seekers have lost their lives. Their crippled boat was overwhelmed by wild seas as it approached the Indian Ocean outpost and swept onto the jagged rocks of Flying Fish Cove. The tragedy is still unfolding. Simon Boda begins our coverage.
The outstretched hand of a woman grasping for life as frantic rescuers try to drag survivors from the boiling sea.
We need to get life jackets down to these people.
This was the refugee boat just seconds before it was swamped by huge waves.
It was terrifying to watch, and there was nothing we can do.
Tossed about like a matchstick in the massive swell, it stood no chance. Eventually thrown onto rocks.
Oh, it's surfing now.
The boat broke up. Men, women and children were thrown into the swirling sea.
The seas were so rough, there was just nothing anybody could do. You know, you couldn't do anything but just stand there and watch, and you just felt so absolutely useless.
I saw children on that boat. I saw children.
Jaden Woosnam videoed the tragedy.
Women and children, yeah. Okay. I didn't see any children make it, actually.
The wooden boat was near Flying Fish Cove just after dawn.
He's screaming, so we ran down to see what it was, and it was a wreck. There was like probably 80 to 100 people on it, just right, it was less than 20 metres off the rocks.
Witnesses watched helplessly as it slammed into the cliff face. Despite pleas by rescuers, a number of survivors refused to let go of the wreckage.
Heaps of them held onto the boat because I don't think they could swim.
Amy Rosbach says the scene was horrific.
The waves are so massive that you couldn't do anything. There was no chance of anyone going from shore out to try to save anyone.
Navy rescuers managed to save about 40 people.
Sadly, some bodies have been retrieved. I can't give you the exact numbers at this stage.
It's unclear where the boat originated, but it's believed the refugees are from Iraq and Iran.
I can't go into all of that detail. I don't have a clear picture at the moment.
What has occurred off the cliffs of Christmas Island early this morning represents a realisation of our worst fears.
The tragedy is something the people of Christmas Island will never forget.
I'll be remembering this for the rest of my life, I think.
Simon Boda, 9 News.
This is a groundbreaking agreement which is designed to smash the business model of people smugglers. People smugglers prey on the desperation of others, and what they are seeking to sell is the hope of having their claim processed in Australia. This will smash that people smugglers' business model. From today, my message to anyone who is considering paying money to a people smuggler and risking their life at sea and perhaps the lives of their family members as well is do not do that in the false hope that you will be able to have your claim processed in Australia. Under this agreement, up to 800 asylum seekers will be transferred to Malaysia. In relation to the Malaysian agreement, there has been considerable speculation and discussion on the questions of human rights. I understand that. This is a tough measure, but we have worked hard to ensure that there are appropriate protections in place on human rights. Asylum seekers who are transferred to Malaysia under this agreement will have their claims processed by UNHCR, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. It should be noted that there are around 90,000 persons in Malaysia who are seeking to have claims processed and to be treated as genuine refugees. The persons transferred to Malaysia will not get preferential processing. They will take their place alongside these 90,000 asylum seekers and they will wait their turn. Malaysia has affirmed that it will not send any of the persons transferred back to persecution in their countries of origin. That is, if people are genuine refugees and have a fear of persecution, then they will not be sent back to their country of origin in breach of the Refugee Convention. This is in fact the central tenet of the Refugee Convention. Those sent to Malaysia will be treated with dignity and respect in accordance with human rights. That's a clear commitment of the Malaysian government as part of this agreement. What that means in practice is that the persons transferred will be there with the permission and agreement of the Malaysian government. That means they will not be subject to any of the penalties imposed on illegal entrants. This means they will not be arrested and they will not be caned. They will be allowed to live in the community after a short period for health and identity checks. They will be allowed ongoing access to employment opportunities and will have access to appropriate medical care. Children will have access to education. To ensure the welfare of the asylum seekers transferred, there will be an oversight committee which will include representatives of UNHCR and also of the International Organisation for Migration, IOM, as well as officials from both countries, from Australia and from Malaysia. I want to make it clear that we will assess the circumstances of individuals prior to transfer, but there will be no blanket exemptions. UNHCR, along with IOM, have been consulted strongly during the course of this agreement's negotiations, and they will have a strong role to play in its implementation. Then, of course, as part of this agreement, Australia will take 4,000 genuine refugees from Malaysia. As I've said, there are around 90,000 asylum seekers in Malaysia as we stand here today. The 4,000 persons will be taken at the rate of 1,000 a year. They will be genuine refugees and they will be people who have been registered in Malaysia by today. That is, the 800 people returned will not be part of the 4,000, and people who arrive in Malaysia seeking asylum after today cannot be amongst those people eligible to take a place in the 4,000. They need to have been in Malaysia and registered by the time of today. We'll continue to work closely with UNHCR, obviously, on the selection of the 4,000 people to come to our country. I believe that this agreement meets our nation's needs in two ways. We obviously want to work in our region in a cooperative way to ensure that we don't see people get on boats and risk their lives trying to come to Australia. So this agreement will better secure our borders and will also mean that we are sending the strongest possible message. Do not risk your life at sea. Do not pay a people smuggler. Do not get on a boat. I've always said that the appropriate way to tackle people smuggling, a regional problem, was through a regional solution. And the Malaysia Agreement is taking place under the framework which was agreed in Bali. It's a true burden-sharing agreement in line with the principles of collective responsibility and cooperation that underpin the regional cooperation framework.
Can I direct you in particular to the final paragraph of Dr. Bennett's advice, paragraph 3.2, which speaks to the Coalition's proposed amendments and which speaks for itself. Can I just very briefly expand on the point of the inferiority of the version put to Mr. Abbott by the Prime Minister at lunchtime today? Might I remind you that the reason the High Court struck down Minister Bowen's declaration of Malaysia was because it was not objectively satisfied that the four criteria set out in section 198A3 of the current Migration Act were able to be satisfied. And in approaching the matter in that way, the court applied a legal principle known to lawyers as jurisdictional error. If the facts weren't there, there was no jurisdiction to make the declaration. The way, therefore, in order to remove any legal doubt, is to ensure that amendments to the Act are drafted in a way which does not make the Minister's declaration depend upon contestable facts. What the Prime Minister, in the version that she produced to Mr Abbott at lunchtime today, has done has actually been to reintroduce into the matters about which the Minister needs to be satisfied a number of criteria that are arguably contestable facts, and that is why it seems to us that the version is, if anything, weaker than the version that was given to us on Friday evening. The way to do this, therefore, is to ensure that there is the appropriate protections, but that the protections do not depend upon contestable facts. And the way that you'll see in Schedule 2 the opposition proposes we go about this is to leave the Minister's discretion wide and indeed unreviewable, but subject to one important limitation, that is, that it is only exercisable in relation to a country which is a party to the UN Refugee Convention. Whether or not a country is a party to the UN Refugee Convention is not a contestable fact. It's a black and white question, and therefore the legal problems which beset the existing Section 198A and which, in our view, would potentially beset what was produced today by the Prime Minister to Mr Abbott would not arise.
Arguably, the government's proposal today is actually an inferior proposal to the one last Friday because it increases the risk of judicial review without actually strengthening the rights protections that were entirely absent last Friday. Now, the Coalition has an alternative position. I will be taking to our party room tonight a proposal for amendments which will put beyond legal doubt the ability of the government to send people offshore for processing, provided they are sent to countries which have acceded to the UN Refugee Convention. This will restore offshore processing while also keeping protections. It will restore offshore processing while retaining offshore protections. It's, in my judgment, a much superior proposal to that which the government has put forward. You will already have, or will shortly receive, a note that we have from the former Solicitor General David Bennett, who has analysed the government's proposals from Friday night and from today, and the proposed amendments that I will be taking to the party room tonight, and he concludes that our proposal provides more legal certainty and more rights protections than either of the government proposals. In effect, our proposal is a win-win, certainty plus protections, offshore processing plus protections, whereas the government's proposals, particularly today's, are a lose-lose. Doubt as to whether anything the government does can survive legal scrutiny while not guaranteeing offshore protections.
The Prime Minister needs is not a blank cheque from the Parliament. They need a decent policy, and that's the problem. This government has had a series of policy failures in this area, starting with their decision to abolish the Howard government's border protection regime 3 years ago. 12,000 people, 241 boats later. This is the mess we're in from the government's own design. Whether it was the failure to handle the Oceanic Viking crisis, whether it was the failed Afghan asylum freeze, whether it was the failed East Timor policy, and now the failed Malaysian solution. The Prime Minister wants a legal blank cheque for more policy failures. What I think the Leader today and the Shadow Attorney-General have made very clear is that we can secure offshore processing. In fact, the Solicitor-General's own opinion, as he said very clearly to us last Friday, does not rule out going to Nauru, but the measures we've put forward today further strengthen both the processing and the protections, but it also provides the opportunity for this government to return to good policy, the policies that Tony Abbott has outlined today, the policies that are designed to stop the boats, that have stopped the boats and will stop the boats, and that remains our policy objective.